The water was too hot, but Amarachi's hands had learned to endure it years ago. She wrung out the washcloth with practiced efficiency, testing the temperature against her inner wrist before bringing it to Kang Dae-Hyun's face. His eyes stared past her, through her, into some distant void that had swallowed him whole 3 years ago. She worked in silence at first, the way she always did, wiping away the night's stillness from his skin. "There you go," she said softly, her voice filling the enormous bedroom like morning light through curtains. "All clean now. It's a beautiful morning outside. Maybe we can go out later." She knew he wouldn't answer. He never did. But the words came anyway, automatic as breathing, necessary as prayer. Her hand trembled slightly as she rinsed the cloth again, and she hated that tremor, hated the crack in her voice that betrayed how close she was to breaking. For 3 years, she had bathed him, fed him, spoken to a man who never answered, never acknowledged her presence with so much as a blink. She had learned the geography of his silence, mapped every inch of his stillness, and told herself it was enough. That being needed was close enough to being wanted. But some mornings, like this one, the weight of it crushed her. The loneliness of caring for someone who might not even know she existed. The particular cruelty of one-sided devotion. She didn't know yet that everything was about to change. Didn't know that the man she'd been tending to with such gentle resignation had been awake behind those empty eyes, aware of every word, every touch, every moment of tenderness she'd poured into the void. Didn't know that when his hand would grip hers in the darkness to come, strong, deliberate, impossible, she would realize the most dangerous thing in that mansion wasn't his past. It was the truth he'd been hiding all along. Before we continue with Amarachi and Dae-Hyun's story, if tales of unexpected romance, redemption, and discovering worth in places society overlooks speak to you, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment sharing your predictions about what happens next, and hit that notification bell so you catch every story I share. Alright, let's dive in. Amarachi's alarm screamed at 5 in the morning, the same shrill electronic cry that had started every day for 3 years. She silenced it with a heavy hand, her body protesting before her feet even touched the cold floor of her studio apartment. The room was small enough that she could see everything from where she lay, the entire scope of her life visible in a single glance. Second-hand furniture, clothes draped over a chair because the closet was too full, a kitchen that was really just a hot plate and a mini-fridge, a bathroom she could barely turn around in. The mirror on the wall caught her reflection as she stood, and she looked away quickly. She knew what it would show. A plus-sized black woman with tired eyes and discount scrubs that never quite fit right, pulling tight across her hips and loose around her shoulders, the fabric cheap enough that it would wear through in another 6 months. She'd gained weight since taking this job, stress and exhaustion manifesting in late-night meals she ate standing up, too tired to even sit down. The world saw her body first. Always first. Before her nursing credentials, before her steady hands and steadier heart, before her capacity for patience that bordered on supernatural. They saw a fat black woman and made their calculations accordingly. Worthy of pity, perhaps. Worthy of service jobs and invisible labor. But never worthy of desire, of being chosen, of taking up space without apology. She'd learned not to linger on her reflection. There was no point. No amount of staring would change what looked back. By 6:30 in the morning, she was on the bus heading toward the wealthy hills of Mokjin Bay, where people like her only existed to serve. She pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city transform around her. The cramped streets and fluorescent-lit convenience stores of her neighborhood giving way to tree-lined avenues and houses that looked like they'd been airlifted from architectural magazines. This was the geography of inequality, rendered in real estate and stone walls high enough to keep certain people out. Hagen Crest Estate appeared through morning fog like something from a dark fairy tale. All sharp angles and black iron gates, windows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, security cameras tracking her approach with mechanical precision. The first time she'd seen it, 3 years ago, her breath had caught in her throat. Not from beauty, but from something else. A sense of foreboding, maybe. Or recognition. That this place would change her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The gates opened for her automatically now. The guards knew her schedule down to the minute. She was part of the routine, as expected and unremarkable as the sunrise. Inside, Kang Dae-Hyun sat in his wheelchair, positioned before floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette perfectly still against the gray morning light. He wore an immaculate black suit, the kind that cost more than Amarachi's annual rent, his hands resting motionless on the armrests. To anyone watching, he was a statue, a prisoner in his own body. A man destroyed by circumstances no one fully understood, reduced to this elegant stillness. But his eyes were different. They were calculating, measuring, watching. Sharp as glass, dark as old bruises. He'd heard the gate open, heard her careful footsteps on the marble floors, heard the particular rhythm of her breathing that told him what kind of night she'd had. In 3 years, she'd never been late, never been careless, never treated him like the monster the streets whispered about. She'd been steady when nothing else was. Gentle when the world demanded hardness. Present when he'd been trying so desperately to disappear. "Good morning, Mr. Kang." Amarachi's voice entered the room before she did, warm and steady like it always was. She set down her bag near the door, rolled up her sleeves with efficient movements, and approached him with the same gentle respect she'd shown since day one. His face remained blank, unresponsive, the mask so perfect now that sometimes he forgot he was wearing it. She didn't mind his silence. She never had. Some people might have felt uncomfortable with the one-sided nature of their relationship, but Amarachi had grown used to it. More than used to it. She'd built a strange kind of peace inside his silence. "It's Tuesday, which means physical therapy after breakfast," she continued, moving to open the curtains wider. Sunlight flooded the room, and for just a moment she caught something in his eyes. A flicker, a shift, like light moving beneath water. But when she looked directly at him, there was nothing. Just the paralyzed Mafia boss whose name still made grown men nervous in certain parts of the city. Just the job that paid her bills and gave her health insurance. Just another day in a life where she was invisible. What Amarachi didn't know was that Kang Dae-Hyun had been counting those days. Every single one. 1,095 days of perfect stillness, of calculated silence, of watching her care for him with a devotion he didn't deserve and couldn't acknowledge. And today, the count would finally end. The routine was sacred to both of them, though only Amarachi would have used that word. She knew every inch of it. How he liked his tea, green, slightly cooled so it wouldn't burn his mouth when she held the cup to his lips. How to position his arms during stretches, gentle pressure, never rushed, working the joints through their range of motion to prevent contractures. The exact angle of his wheelchair by the window, facing east, always east, so the morning light would fall across his face just so. But routines were also where truth hid. "You know what's funny, Mr. Kang?" Amarachi said while preparing his breakfast in the enormous kitchen that always felt too large, too empty, like a commercial space pretending to be a home. Her voice echoed off the marble countertops and high ceilings. "I've been doing this for 3 years and I still talk to you like you can hear me. My sister says I'm crazy. Says I'm wasting my words on a man who doesn't even know I exist." She arranged his meal on a tray with the same care she brought to everything else. Oatmeal, exactly the right consistency. Fresh fruit cut into precise pieces. Tea in the cup with the handle positioned so she could grip it easily. Everything thought through, nothing left to chance. "But I think you do hear me," she continued, carrying the tray back to his room. "I think you're in there somewhere. Just stuck." She set the tray on the side table, her hands, thick and capable, arranging everything with deliberate care. Then she did something she always did but never thought about. She adjusted his collar, smoothing the fabric with her fingertips, a gesture of tenderness that had nothing to do with medical necessity. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly, meeting his unseeing eyes. "Being stuck. Being invisible." Kang Dae-Hyun's chest tightened. If only she knew. If only he could tell her that every word she'd spoken to him over 3 years had landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples that reached places inside him he'd thought were dead. That her voice had become the only sound that mattered in a life he'd systematically stripped of meaning. That he'd memorized the cadence of her breathing, the particular sigh she made when she was tired, the way she hummed old gospel songs while she worked. The morning continued in its established pattern. Physical therapy, where she moved his limbs through carefully prescribed exercises, her hands strong and sure. Medication administered with clinical precision. A bath that she managed with such matter-of-fact efficiency that it almost wasn't humiliating. Almost. She hummed while she worked, old gospel songs her grandmother used to sing, melodies that spoke of suffering and redemption in equal measure. Her touch was never clinical, never cold. She handled him like he was human, not a job, not a body, but a person who deserved dignity even in his helplessness. That evening, after his dinner, something inside Amarachi broke. She'd received a text message during her shift, her phone buzzing in her pocket while she was helping Kang Dae-Hyun with his meal. She'd ignored it then, professional as always, but later, when she had a moment to check, the words had hit her like a physical blow. "Hey, I've been thinking about our date tomorrow. You seem really sweet, but I don't think we're a good match. Not really my type. Hope you understand." The same message she'd received a dozen times before, phrased slightly differently but always meaning the same thing. "You're not attractive enough. You're not thin enough. You're not worth choosing." This one had seemed different, though. They'd talked for 3 weeks, long conversations that had made her laugh, made her hope. He'd said all the right things. Had seemed genuinely interested. And she'd let herself believe, let herself imagine that maybe, finally, someone would see past her body to everything else she was. But of course not. Of course the moment he saw her photos, the real ones, not the carefully angled selfies that minimized her size, he'd lost interest. Of course she'd been stupid enough to hope. Amarachi sat in the chair across from Kang Dae-Hyun, thinking he couldn't see her face crumple, thinking she was alone in her devastation. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "Why am I not enough?" she whispered, her voice cracking like ice under pressure. "I'm kind. I'm smart. I work hard. I'm good at what I do. But the world looks at me and sees less. Sees someone who doesn't deserve to be chosen." A tear rolled down her cheek, hot and shameful. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed even though she thought he couldn't see, even though she believed she was speaking into a void that would swallow her words without acknowledgement. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kang," she said, trying to pull herself together. "You don't need my problems. You've got enough of your own." But Kang Dae-Hyun's right hand, the one resting on the armrest, twitched. Just barely. A movement so small that, in any other context, it would have been meaningless. His jaw clenched, muscles tightening almost imperceptibly, his whole body screaming with the effort of remaining still when everything in him wanted to move, to reach for her, to tell her she was wrong about everything. He'd heard every word, felt every ounce of her pain as if it were his own. And in that moment, the man who'd built an empire on cold calculation, who'd ordered violence with a nod of his head and destroyed lives with casual efficiency, felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. She was wrong. She was enough. She'd always been enough. More than enough. She was everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Amarachi started noticing things that didn't make sense. Small things, impossible things, details that her trained eye couldn't ignore no matter how much she tried to rationalize them away. The wheelchair had moved 3 inches from where she'd left it, positioned at a slightly different angle to the window. She was certain of it. She had a system, always placed it in exactly the same spot, and now it was off. Just slightly, but noticeably. His hand was positioned differently after she'd returned from fetching his medicine from the kitchen. She'd left it resting palm down on the armrest, and now it was palm up, fingers slightly curled. She stood staring at it for a full minute, trying to convince herself she'd remembered wrong. Once, she could have sworn his eyes followed her across the room when she moved to close the curtains. But when she turned to check, they were fixed and empty as always, staring at nothing. "I'm losing it," she muttered to herself one afternoon, reorganizing his bookshelf while he sat in his usual position. The bookshelf was an interesting collection. Medical journals, thick textbooks on neurology and rehabilitation, Korean literature, novels and short story collections in both Korean and English translation. And strangely, almost incongruously, poetry. Multiple volumes of poetry by different authors, some well-worn, pages dog-eared and spines cracked from repeated reading. She pulled out a thin volume, the cover elegant and minimalist. Pablo Neruda. Love poems, all of them. 100 love sonnets. She flipped through pages covered in Korean annotations, someone's careful handwriting filling the margins. "A Mafia boss who read love poems," she said softly, looking at Kang Dae-Hyun's profile. "Did someone read these to you? Before whatever happened to you?" Silence. Always silence. But his breathing changed. She was certain of it. The rhythm shifted, became shallower, more controlled. Like someone trying very hard not to react. Amarachi tried to shake off the paranoia. The isolation was getting to her. 3 years of one-sided conversations, of caring for someone who might not even know she existed, of pouring herself into a relationship that could never be reciprocal. It was making her imagine things, see patterns where there were none, desperately assign meaning to random chance. Yet the doubts grew, persistent as weeds. One night, while reviewing his medical files, something she wasn't technically supposed to do but curiosity had finally won, she found something that made her blood run cold. His initial diagnosis 3 years ago was incomplete. The neurologist's notes mentioned inconsistent responses during examination and requires further evaluation to determine extent of consciousness, but there was nothing after that. No follow-up appointments. No additional testing. No clarification of his condition. Almost like someone had stopped the investigation deliberately. "Mr. Kang," she said slowly the next morning, watching his face with new attention, studying every micro-expression. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand how crazy this is going to sound." She knelt beside his wheelchair, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were shaking. This was insane. She was about to make a complete fool of herself. But she had to know. Had to ask the question that had been growing in her mind like a tumor. "Can you hear me? I mean, really hear me? Are you aware right now, in this moment?" For 5 excruciating seconds, nothing happened. The room was so quiet she could hear her own pulse, could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, could hear everything except the answer she desperately needed. Then, so subtle she almost missed it, so small it could have been imagination, his pinky finger moved. Deliberately. Once. Amarachi's blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. Her vision tunneled. The room spun. "Oh my God," she breathed, stumbling backward, her legs hitting the chair behind her. "Oh my God, you're in there. You've been in there this whole time." Kang Dae-Hyun's face remained a perfect mask. Not a muscle moved. But inside, everything was screaming. She knew. After 3 years of perfect deception, of maintaining this impossible stillness, she finally knew. And he had no idea if that would save them both or destroy everything he'd been trying to accomplish. The question hung in the air between them like smoke. If he could move, even slightly, even just one finger, why hadn't he revealed himself? What was he hiding from? And more terrifying, what else had he been hiding? Amarachi spent the rest of that day in a state of shock, moving through her duties automatically while her mind raced. She gave him his lunch, performed his afternoon exercises, administered his medications, all while trying to process the implications of what she'd discovered. Every time she looked at him, she saw something different now. Not a patient, but a person. Not a victim of circumstance, but someone making an active choice to remain hidden. But why? Why would anyone choose this? 3 years of complete helplessness, of being touched and moved and cared for like an infant. 3 years of silence and stillness and total dependence. What could possibly be worth that? She wanted to confront him directly, demand answers, but some instinct told her to wait. If he'd kept this secret for 3 years, he had reasons. Possibly dangerous ones. This was Kang Dae-Hyun, after all. The name that still made certain people in Mokjin Bay lower their voices. The man whose past was whispered about in careful tones. That night, lying in her narrow bed in her cramped apartment, Amarachi couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. The deliberate movement of his finger. The proof that someone was home behind those empty eyes. And more than that, the implications. He'd heard everything. Every word she'd spoken to him over 3 years. Every confession of loneliness, every moment of vulnerability, every time she'd treated him like a confidant because she thought he couldn't hear her. He knew everything about her. And she knew almost nothing about him. The phone call came at 11:47 at night, her phone buzzing on the nightstand and pulling her from the edge of sleep she'd finally been approaching. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her reach for it. "Miss Ngoy." The voice was tense, clipped, professional. "Seo Min-guk, Kang Dae-Hyun's head of security. You need to return to the estate immediately." "What?" "It's almost midnight, I don't work nights, what's?" "Security situation. Mr. Kang cannot be left unattended. Pack an overnight bag. A car is already on its way to your location. It will arrive in 15 minutes. What kind of situation? What's happening? That's not your concern. Pack the bag, Miss Ngoy. Now. The line went dead. Amarachi's hands shook as she threw clothes into a duffel bag. T-shirts, sweatpants, toiletries, her phone charger, moving on automatic while her mind spun through possibilities. Security situation could mean anything. A threat against Kang Dae-Hyun. A break-in attempt. Rival factions from his past, whatever that past actually was. 20 minutes later, she was in the back of a black sedan, the city sliding past in streaks of light and shadow. The driver didn't speak, didn't answer any of her questions, just drove with focused efficiency toward the hills. Haejin Crest Estate was transformed when they arrived. Metal shutters had descended over windows. Guards stood at every entrance, armed with weapons they weren't even trying to conceal. The air felt thick with tension, with barely controlled violence. Amarachi had never seen it like this. For 3 years, the mansion had been quiet, almost serene in its isolation. Now it looked like what it actually was. A fortress. "What's happening?" she demanded as a guard she didn't recognize led her upstairs. Rival organization made threats against Mr. Kang's life. Lockdown protocol. You'll stay in the guest room adjacent to his suite. Don't leave the wing under any circumstances. They left her there, alone with Kang Dae-Hyun in his bedroom. The door locked from the outside with a heavy, final-sounding click that made her stomach drop. Amarachi stood in the doorway for a moment, trying to process. She was locked in. Trapped. With a man who'd been pretending to be paralyzed for 3 years, during what was apparently a credible death threat. This was insane. This was beyond anything she'd signed up for. Kang Dae-Hyun was in his usual position by the window, though the shutters were down now, blocking any view. His face showed nothing. If he was afraid, if he was aware of the danger, there was no sign of it. "This is about you, isn't it?" Amarachi said quietly, moving closer. "Someone's coming for you. Someone from your past." No response. But she knew better now. She knew he heard every word. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Amarachi tried to rest in the guest room, but couldn't. Every sound made her jump. Footsteps in the hallway, voices speaking in low tones, the distant wail of sirens somewhere in the city. She lay on top of the covers fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on even the pretense of sleep and returned to his room. He was exactly where she'd left him, of course. Perfectly still, perfectly positioned. She pulled a chair close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't know what game you're playing, Kang Dae-Hyun." She'd never used his first name before. It felt transgressive, intimate. "But if we're going to die tonight, I need to know why. Why pretend? Why let me care for you like this, like you were broken, when maybe you never were?" Her voice cracked on the last word. 3 years. 3 years of her life given to this man, this deception. And for what? The moonlight caught his face through a gap in the shutters, and for the first time she saw it clearly. A single tear tracking down his cheek, following the line of his jaw, catching the light like a small diamond. He was crying. The man who couldn't move, who'd maintained perfect stillness for 3 years, was crying. "Oh God," Amarachi breathed, reaching out instinctively, her caregiver instincts overriding everything else. Her thumb brushed across his skin to wipe away the tear, and the moment she touched him, his eyes closed. Slowly, deliberately. A conscious action. It was an answer. An apology. A confession. All at once. She kept her hand there, cupping his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the realness of him. And something shifted between them in that dark room, something that had been building for 3 years without either of them naming it or acknowledging it or even fully understanding it. "We're going to survive this," she promised, though she had no idea if it was true, no idea what they were even surviving against. "And then you're going to tell me everything. Every single thing." His eyes opened, meeting hers fully for the first time in 3 years. And Amarachi saw it. The man behind the mask. Lonely. Terrified. Desperate to be known. Desperate to be seen. Everything she'd felt herself, reflected back at her from his dark eyes. They stayed like that until dawn broke through the shutters, her hand on his face, his eyes locked on hers. Not speaking, because he couldn't and she didn't need to. Just being present with each other in a way they'd never been before, despite 3 years of intimacy. Morning light broke through the locked windows in thin, determined strips. The lockdown continued, but the immediate threat had apparently passed, at least according to the terse updates Co Min-guk delivered through the door every few hours. Amarachi hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night in that chair watching Kang Dae-Hyun, her mind racing with impossible questions that multiplied faster than she could process them. Around dawn, exhaustion made her bold in a way fear never could. "I'm going to search this room," she announced, standing up with sudden resolution. "And you're going to let me, because you owe me that much. 3 years, Dae-Hyun. 3 years of my life, and I don't even know who you really are." She started with the obvious places, half expecting him to somehow stop her, to break his stillness and reveal himself fully. But he remained motionless, only his eyes tracking her movements around the room. Drawers first, finding nothing but clothes organized with military precision. The closet next, expensive suits in blacks and grays, shoes that probably cost more than her car. Everything immaculate, everything perfect, everything revealing absolutely nothing about the person who wore these things. Then she remembered the safe. She'd watched him give the combination to his lawyer once, 18 months ago, thinking he was unconscious during the meeting. She'd memorized it without meaning to, the way you remember things that seem important even when you don't know why. 6 digits. His daughter's birthday, she would learn later. The child who'd lived only 3 weeks. Her hands shook as she knelt before the safe hidden behind a panel in the wall. The numbers clicked into place with mechanical precision. The door swung open with a whisper of expensive hinges. Inside, cash. Stacks of it, more money than she'd ever seen in one place. A gun, black and heavy-looking, nestled in foam padding. Documents in Korean and English, official-looking papers with red stamps and signatures. And at the bottom, a worn leather journal, the cover soft with age and handling. Amarachi's breath caught as she lifted it out. This was personal. This was real. This was the truth she'd been searching for. The entries were in Korean, elegant handwriting flowing across pages in neat columns. But scattered throughout were photographs, and those she could understand. Her vision blurred as she looked at them, piecing together a story that broke her heart with each new image. A young Kang Dae-Hyun, maybe 25 years old, smiling. Actually smiling, his whole face transformed with joy she'd never seen even a hint of. Beside him stood a beautiful woman with kind eyes, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. The next photo showed the same woman in a hospital bed, pale and exhausted but holding a tiny bundle. Pride and fear mixed on Dae-Hyun's face as he stood beside her. Then photos of him alone with the baby. The woman was gone. You could see it in his eyes, the light extinguished. He held his daughter like she was made of glass, like the slightest wrong move would shatter her. And maybe it had. The dates on the photos told the story her limited Korean couldn't. 3 weeks between the first photo of the baby and the last. She flipped through more pages, finding the final entry dated 3 years and 2 months ago. Right before his paralysis began. Right before he disappeared into this terrible stillness. "You wanted to disappear," Amarachi whispered, looking at him with new understanding flooding through her. "Your wife died bringing your daughter into the world, and then your daughter died anyway, and the Mafia life you'd built took everything from you. So you decided to vanish without them actually having to kill you." His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Confirmation. "So you faked the paralysis," she continued, her voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. "Became invisible in plain sight. Let everyone think you were powerless, broken, no longer a threat. While you," she paused, looking back at the documents in the safe. "While you what?" The documents told their own story once she started reading them carefully. Transfer records. Payments to names she didn't recognize but could guess at. Victims' families, most likely. People his organization had hurt, now receiving anonymous compensation. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, in Switzerland, in Singapore, all slowly being drained and redirected. And letters. Copies of letters sent to prosecutors, to journalists, to law enforcement. Information about the organization's operations, evidence of crimes, details that could only have come from someone on the inside. "You're not the monster," Amarachi breathed, understanding washing over her in waves. "You're trying to destroy it from within. You've been dismantling your own criminal empire, piece by piece, while everyone thought you were helpless." She kept reading, going through page after page of meticulous documentation. 3 years of quiet penance, of undoing what he'd built, of trying to balance scales that could never truly be balanced. And then she found the more recent entries, pages and pages in Korean that she couldn't read, but her name appeared again and again. "Amarachi. Amarachi. Amarachi. What did you write about me?" she demanded, holding the journal up, her heart pounding. "What could you possibly have to say about me?" For the first time, Kang Dae-Hyun's lips moved. Not speech, not yet, but the shape of words. Silent syllables forming with agonizing effort. She couldn't hear them, couldn't make them out, but she didn't need to. She saw it in his eyes, in the way his whole face changed when he looked at her. Everything he'd been too afraid to say, too broken to acknowledge, too trapped in his own penance to admit. He'd fallen in love with her. Somewhere in 3 years of her steady presence, her gentle care, her refusal to see him as the monster everyone else did, he'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her. And he'd written it all down in a language she couldn't read, confessions made to pages because he couldn't make them to her face. The lockdown lifted by mid-afternoon, guards standing down, shutters rolling back up to let light flood the mansion again. The threat had passed, whatever it had been. Seo Min-guk came to brief them, or rather to brief Amarachi since Dae-Hyun apparently couldn't hear him anyway. "Rival faction making noise," he said tersely. "They've been dealt with. You can return to your normal schedule." But normal felt like a word from another language now. Nothing would ever be normal again. Amarachi should have left. Should have gone home, processed everything she'd learned, maybe called her sister and tried to explain the inexplicable. But she couldn't make herself walk away. Not now. Not when she finally understood. "I'm going to read to you," she said that evening, settling into her usual chair with his poetry book in her hands. "And you're going to listen. Really listen. No more games. No more pretending." She opened to a random page, her voice soft but steady, filling the quiet room with words someone else had written but that felt like they belonged to this moment. "I want you to know one thing." She read slowly, letting each word land. "You know how this is. If I look at the crystal moon, at the red branch of the slow autumn at my window, if I touch near the fire the impalpable ash or the wrinkled body of the log, everything carries me to you." Amarachi paused, looking up at him. His eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Everything carries me to you," she repeated softly. "That's beautiful, isn't it? The idea that the whole world becomes a path leading to one person. That everything you see, everything you touch, it all means that person somehow." His eyes glistened. She saw it clearly now, the emotion he couldn't hide anymore. She kept reading, poem after poem, her voice growing rough with emotion. Love sonnets about longing and loss, about the unbearable weight of feeling too much, about the desperate human need to be known completely by another person. The words filled the space between them, saying everything neither of them could say directly. When her voice finally gave out, she set the book down carefully and did something she'd never done before. Not like this. Not with intention. She reached for his hand, really held it, threading her fingers through his and gripping tight. "I see you, Dae-Hyun," she whispered, using his given name again, claiming that intimacy. "I don't know why you chose this life, this cage, this terrible penance. But I see you. The real you. The one who cries in the dark and reads love poems and gives away blood money trying to make things right. The one who's been so scared of living that dying seemed easier." His hand, so carefully limp for 3 years, tightened around hers. Just a fraction. Just enough. The smallest acknowledgement, but it meant everything. Amarachi's eyes filled with tears that spilled over before she could stop them. "There you are," she said, her voice breaking. "There you are." They sat like that for over an hour, maybe 2. Time felt meaningless. No words, because words would have been inadequate anyway. Just hands clasped, 2 invisible people finally being seen by each other. 2 people who'd been so convinced of their own unworthiness that they'd hidden from the world in different ways. Her in her body, him in his stillness. Both of them sure that being known would only confirm what they feared most about themselves. "You know what I think," Amarachi said eventually, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "I think you've been paralyzed. Just not in your body. In your heart. Too scared to live again after losing everything. Too scared to let anyone matter because mattering means you can lose them." She brought his hand to her cheek, holding it there against her skin, warm and solid and real. "I know that fear," she continued, her voice steady now despite the tears. "I live it every day. Scared no one will ever choose me. That I'm too much or not enough or just wrong somehow. That my body makes me unlovable, makes me invisible in every way that matters." She smiled sadly, turning to look directly into his eyes. "But sitting here with you, even with all this craziness, even with death threats and lockdowns and whatever the hell else is happening, I feel less alone than I have in years. Maybe in my whole life. Because you see me too, don't you? You've been seeing me all along." In the dim evening light, Kang Dae-Hyun's mouth moved again. This time, sound came with it. Barely a whisper, each syllable costing him everything, his voice raw and broken from 3 years of disuse. "Za. Are." Amarachi gasped, her whole body freezing. Her heart stopped, then started again, pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. "You spoke," she breathed. "Oh my God, you just spoke." He kept going, forcing more words out, his face contorted with effort. "Bo, ti, full. What? You are beautiful." Amarachi broke. 3 years of loneliness, of being overlooked and dismissed and made to feel less than. 3 years of men who canceled dates when they saw her in person, of being told she was sweet but not their type, of making herself smaller in a world that already wanted her to disappear. All of it shattered in that moment as this broken, dangerous, impossible man spoke her truth out loud. She wasn't unlovable. Wasn't unworthy. Wasn't too much or not enough or wrong in any of the ways she'd been told she was. She was beautiful. Had been beautiful all along. Had just needed someone to see it, to say it, to make it real. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, both of them crying now, both of them finally letting themselves be vulnerable with another human being. "We're so messed up," she said, laughing through her tears. "Both of us. Hiding from the world in the stupidest ways possible." His lips moved against her forehead, forming words she felt more than heard. Not hiding anymore. Everything fell apart on a Thursday, exactly 6 days after the lockdown. Amarachi arrived for her shift to find the mansion transformed yet again, but differently this time. Not the controlled danger of a security threat, but chaos. Men in expensive suits filled the main hall, under bosses from the organization, she realized. The people who actually ran things now that Dae-Hyun was supposedly incapacitated. Their voices carried up the stairs, angry and escalating. "What's happening?" she asked a guard she recognized, one of the few who'd ever been kind to her. "Emergency meeting. Stay in the kitchen, Miss Ngoy. Please." But Amarachi had never been good at following orders when something felt wrong, when her instincts screamed that someone she cared about was in danger. She crept close enough to hear the voices in the study, pressing herself against the wall outside the door. 3 years of this pathetic act, a harsh voice cut through the others, thick with contempt. "We've been patient, Dae-Hyun. More patient than you deserved. But the other families are circling now. They think we're weak. They think you've made us weak. His condition is permanent." That was Seo Min-guk, his voice carefully neutral. "We've adapted. The organization continues." "Adapted." Another voice, younger, angrier. "We've bled territory to the Hwang family. Lost 3 major operations to police raids. Revenue down 40% in 2 years. And for what? So we can babysit a vegetable." Amarachi's hands clenched into fists. The cruelty in their voices, the complete dismissal of Dae-Hyun's humanity, made her want to scream. "There are questions," the first voice continued, colder now. "About money moving without authorization. About information reaching prosecutors. About whether his condition is quite as permanent as we've been told." The room went silent. Amarachi could hear her own heartbeat. "You're suggesting," Co Min-guk started. I'm suggesting we've been played. I'm suggesting his paralysis started right after he transferred millions out of our accounts. I'm suggesting he's been conscious this whole time, destroying everything we built from the inside while we all played nurse. Amarachi's blood turned to ice. They knew. Or suspected. And if they knew, Dae-Hyun was in immediate danger. She pushed the door open before she could think better of it. Every eye in the room turned to her. Dae-Hyun was there, wheelchair positioned at the head of the table, his face that familiar blank mask. 12 men in suits surrounded him, and the atmosphere was thick with barely contained violence. "Get out," someone snarled. A man she didn't recognize, sharp suit, sharper eyes. "This doesn't concern you." "Don't talk about him like that," Amarachi said, her voice shaking but determined. "You don't know anything about what he's been through." "About what?" The man stood, moving toward her with predatory grace. "About how convenient his paralysis started right after he began betraying us. About how he's been feeding our secrets to the feds. About how he's systematically dismantled everything this organization built." The room erupted. Men shouting over each other, accusations flying. Amarachi stood frozen, trying to process. They knew everything. All of it. Dae-Hyun's careful plan, his quiet penance, his attempts at redemption. They'd figured it out. "You knew, didn't you?" The man was in her face now, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "The little nurse. In on it the whole time. How much did he pay you to keep quiet?" I didn't," Amarachi stammered, her world tilting. "I didn't know anything until..." "Until when?" "Until yesterday. Last week." He grabbed her arm, gripped tight enough to hurt. "How long have you been helping him betray us?" "She knows nothing." Co Min-guk stepped between them, forcing the man to release her. "She's just a caregiver. She has no involvement in organizational business." "Just a fool, then," another voice laughed cruelly. 3 years wiping his ass while he played us all. That's almost sadder. Amarachi felt like she was drowning. She looked at Dae-Hyun, silently begging him to say something, anything. To defend himself, to defend her, to break his cover and prove he was alive and aware and capable of protecting them both. But his eyes met hers for just a fraction of a second, and she saw it. Apology. Resignation. Goodbye. He was choosing silence again, choosing to let her believe she'd been used, choosing to protect her the only way he knew how, by making her seem irrelevant. "I want her gone," the lead underboss said, turning away from her dismissively. "Tonight. Pay her what we owe her and make sure she signs an NDA about everything she's seen here." He leaned close to Dae-Hyun's wheelchair, his voice dropping to something almost intimate in its cruelty. "And you? Your time is up. One way or another. We're voting tomorrow night on leadership restructuring. I think we all know how that vote will go." Amarachi ran. She packed her bag with shaking hands, tears blurring her vision so badly she could barely see what she was grabbing. 3 years. 3 years of caring, of talking, of slowly falling for a man she thought she understood. And what? Had any of it been real? Or had she just been another pawn in a game she was too naive to see? He'd let them humiliate her. Had sat there silent while they called her a fool, while they dismissed her as nothing. Hadn't defended her, hadn't protected her, hadn't given her any sign that she'd mattered at all. As she walked out of Hagen Crest Estate for what she thought was the last time, Amarachi didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Because if she did, she'd see him in that window where he always sat, and she'd break completely. Some fairy tales, she realized, were never meant to have happy endings. 3 days passed like years. Amarachi stayed in her apartment, ignoring calls from the nursing agency asking why she'd quit without notice. How could she explain? How could she put into words what it felt like to have your heart broken by someone who'd never even admitted they had one? By someone who'd used your care, your devotion, your love, as cover for their own agenda? She'd been so stupid, so desperate to matter to someone that she'd built an entire relationship out of one-sided conversations and wishful thinking. He'd spoken to her once, called her beautiful once, and she'd let herself believe it meant something real. On the 4th night, her phone rang. Unknown number again. She almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But something made her pick up. Miss Ngoy. Seo Min-guk's voice, quieter than she'd ever heard it. You need to listen very carefully. I don't want anything to do with. He's dying. Amarachi's breath stopped. The world stopped. The organization is voting tomorrow night, Seo Min-guk continued. They're going to remove him. Permanently. He knows it's coming. He's been sitting in that wheelchair for 4 days, hasn't eaten, hasn't responded to anyone. He's just waiting for it to end. Why are you telling me this? Her voice came out broken, barely audible. A long pause. She could hear him breathing, hear the weight of what he was about to say. Because in 3 years, you're the only person who made him smile. I saw it once, when you weren't looking. You were singing while you worked, some old song, and just for a second his face changed. Just for a second, he looked alive. His voice roughened with emotion. I think you're the only reason he'd want to keep living. And I think if you don't come back, he's going to let them kill him without fighting. The line went dead. Amarachi sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. He'd smiled. Dae-Hyun had smiled because of her, and she'd never even known. All this time she'd thought she was invisible to him, thought she was just part of his cover, just another tool in his plan. But she'd made him smile. She'd given him something worth living for, even when he was trying so hard to die. Damn it, she whispered into the empty apartment. Damn it, damn it, damn it. She grabbed her keys. Kang Dae-Hyun sat in his wheelchair, positioned at the window for the last time. Tomorrow night they would come. Would make it look like complications from his condition, probably. Quick and clean and impossible to prosecute. His plan, incomplete but meaningful, would die with him. The organization would continue. The families he'd tried to compensate would never receive the rest of what he owed them. The evidence he'd compiled would remain hidden, useless. He'd accepted it. After losing his wife, his daughter, any hope of redemption that actually meant something, what was left? He'd tried. For 3 years, he'd tried to balance scales that could never truly be balanced. And he'd failed. Then he heard the door. Footsteps he'd memorized, a rhythm he'd know anywhere. You're an idiot. Amarachi's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. A brilliant, self-sacrificing, absolutely infuriating idiot. He wanted to turn, to see her, but the mask had become so natural over 3 years that he didn't remember how to drop it. Didn't know if he still could. She walked around to face him, and his heart stopped. Her eyes were blazing with fury and something else. Something that looked dangerously like love. I know why you stayed silent in that meeting, she said, kneeling down so they were eye level. I figured it out. You thought if they believed I was just a naive nurse who knew nothing, they'd leave me alone. You sacrificed my dignity, let them humiliate me, because you thought that would keep me safe. His throat worked, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Well, guess what? She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I don't want to be safe. I don't want to be protected like I'm something fragile that needs hiding. I want to be here. With you. For you. Because in 3 years, you became my person. And I don't care if that makes me stupid or crazy or the biggest fool in Mokjin Bay. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavered. I love you, Dae-Hyun. I love you broken and scared and hiding in plain sight. I love you guilty and trying to make amends. I love you exactly as you are. And I'm not leaving. Not again. Not ever. So whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they vote, whatever danger comes, we face it together. Do you understand me? For 3 years, Kang Dae-Hyun had maintained perfect control. Had hidden every emotion, suppressed every reaction, become a master of stillness. But this, Amarachi's declaration, her furious, fearless love, it broke something fundamental inside him. The last wall finally crumbled. His hand moved. Not the tiny twitch she'd seen before, but deliberately, fully. He raised it to her face, cupping her cheek with a touch that was gentle despite 3 years of forced immobility. Za-Are. Her name, clearer now, stronger. Za-Are. Yes, she breathed, leaning into his touch. Yes, I'm here. I'm right here. Forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. Nothing. You did what you thought you had to do. Love. The word cost him everything. Love. You. Amarachi kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as 3 years of longing poured into that single point of connection. His hand tightened on her face, the other one rising shakily too. Pull her closer. They kissed like people drowning, like people who'd been holding their breath for years and finally could breathe. When they broke apart, both crying, both laughing, Amarachi pressed her forehead to his. We're going to survive this, she said fiercely. Both of us. Together. I don't care what it takes. Us. I don't care. I've been playing it safe my whole life, making myself small, hiding from the world. I'm done hiding. If loving you is dangerous, then I'll be dangerous. If standing with you makes me a target, then I'm a target. I choose this. I choose you. His eyes closed, fresh tears escaping. In his entire life, no one had ever chosen him. Not like this. Not knowing everything he'd done, everything he was, all the ways he was broken. But she did. She chose him anyway. The emergency meeting convened the next evening in the same study. Amarachi insisted on attending, and there was enough confusion about her presence that no one stopped her. She stood against the wall while 12 underbosses arranged themselves around the table. Dae-Hyun was wheeled in, positioned at the head as always. His face was blank, but Amarachi could see the tension in his shoulders now. Could read him in ways no one else could. We're here to vote on leadership restructuring, the lead underboss began. Kang Dae-Hyun has been incapacitated for 3 years. In that time, the organization has suffered significant losses. It's time to officially stop, Dae-Hyun said. The room froze. Absolute, total silence. Every eye fixed on him in shock. Did he just... Someone started. Dae-Hyun's hands gripped the wheelchair armrests. With visible effort, with muscles that hadn't been properly used in 3 years, he pushed himself to standing. His legs shook. His whole body trembled. But he stood, towering over them all, his eyes clear and sharp and very much aware. I said stop, he repeated, voice still rough but growing stronger. All of you. Stop talking. Chaos erupted. Men shouting, jumping to their feet, hands reaching for weapons. Seo Min-guk moved to Dae-Hyun's side protectively. Amarachi stayed against the wall, her heart pounding, trusting him to do what needed to be done. You've been conscious, the lead underboss hissed. This whole time. You played us. Yes, Dae-Hyun said simply. I've been aware. Every moment. Every decision. Every betrayal you think I committed. I did them all deliberately. Why? Why destroy what we built? Because what we built was poison. His voice carried now, filling the room with absolute authority. My wife died because of this life. My daughter died because I couldn't protect her from the consequences of what I'd become. And I realized I had 2 choices. Die, or spend however many years I had left trying to undo the damage. He looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes in turn. I've transferred over $200 million to victims' families. Provided evidence to prosecutors that resulted in 17 arrests across 4 cities. Dismantled our human trafficking operations, our drug distribution networks, and severed connections with 3 international cartels. I've been systematically destroying this organization from the inside for 3 years. The room exploded again. Someone drew a gun. Seo Min-guk drew faster, positioning himself between the weapon and Dae-Hyun. And I'm not done, Dae-Hyun continued, his voice cutting through the noise. Everything I've compiled, every document, every recorded conversation, every piece of evidence, it's all in the hands of federal prosecutors. With instructions to release it if anything happens to me or anyone I care about. He looked directly at Amarachi, and she felt the weight of that gaze, the love and desperation in it. You can kill me tonight. You can vote to remove me, restructure the organization, do whatever you want. But it won't matter. This empire is already fallen. I made sure of that. The only question is whether you go down with it, or whether you take the deal I've arranged. What deal? someone demanded. Cooperation with federal authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. Testimony against our international partners. Dissolution of the organization and restitution to victims. It's already on the table. All of you can walk away with 5 to 10 years instead of life. Or you can fight, and I promise you'll lose. The lead underboss stared at him with pure hatred. You self-righteous bastard. You think destroying everything makes you a hero? No, Dae-Hyun said quietly. I think it makes me slightly less of a monster. That's all I was aiming for. He swayed slightly, his legs barely holding him. Amarachi moved instinctively to his side, sliding under his arm to support him. Let them see. Let them all see that she stood with him. This meeting is over, Dae-Hyun said. You have 48 hours to contact the prosecutors and accept the deal. After that, they move forward without your cooperation. Choose wisely. He let Amarachi help him back into the wheelchair, his body finally giving out. But the message had been delivered. The truth was out. And somehow, impossibly, they were both still alive. 6 months later, the cottage by the beach was everything neither of them had known they needed. Small, isolated, quiet. The kind of place where the world couldn't reach them, where the past felt distant enough to breathe around. Amarachi stood at the window, watching Dae-Hyun walk along the shore. He still struggled sometimes, his legs weak from 3 years of forced immobility. Physical therapy helped, but progress was slow. He'd probably never fully recover, the doctors said. Some damage was permanent. But he was alive. And free. Most of the organization had taken the deal. A few had tried to run and been caught. The whole structure had collapsed exactly as Dae-Hyun had planned, and somehow he'd walked away with immunity in exchange for his testimony. A miracle, the prosecutors called it. The highest-ranking organized crime figure to ever fully cooperate. Amarachi called it love. Love that had given him a reason to want to survive the aftermath. He turned on the beach, seeing her in the window, and waved. That smile she'd never seen in 3 years, that Seo Min-guk had only witnessed once, was a regular occurrence now. She waved back, her heart full in ways she'd never imagined possible. They were building something new. Something that had nothing to do with blood money or penance or hiding from the world. Something simple and real and theirs. Later that evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the ocean. Dae-Hyun's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Giving up everything. The power, the wealth, all of it. I regret what I was, he said. Not what I'm becoming. And what are you becoming? He turned to look at her, his eyes soft with a kind of vulnerability he'd once thought would destroy him. Yours, he said simply. If you'll still have me. Amarachi laughed, the sound carried away by ocean wind. You absolute fool. I'll always have you. Even when you're being an idiot. Even when you try to protect me by pushing me away. Even when. He kissed her, cutting off the words, and for a long moment there was nothing but them and the sunset and the sound of waves breaking on shore. When they finally pulled apart, Amarachi rested her head on his shoulder. We're really doing this, aren't we? She said. Building a life. A real one. We are. It's going to be hard. You know that, right? Adjusting to normal life after everything. The nightmares probably won't stop. The guilt won't disappear. There'll be days when... I know, he interrupted gently. I know it won't be easy. But for the first time in my life, I want the hard parts. Want to fight through them. Because you're on the other side. Amarachi felt tears prick her eyes. Happy ones this time. Healing ones. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he replied. My Zare. My beautiful, stubborn, impossible gift. They sat like that as darkness fell, two people who'd been invisible in their own ways finally seeing and being seen. Two people who'd found each other in the midst of lies and danger and broken penance, and somehow built something true. But as the stars came out above them, a phone buzzed in the cottage. A message from an unknown number. Just 3 words that made Amarachi's blood run cold when she checked it later. It's not over. She didn't tell Dae-Hyun. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight was theirs, peaceful and earned. But tomorrow she'd show him. Tomorrow they'd figure out together who was still out there, still watching, still waiting. Because some debts, apparently, could never be fully paid. Some enemies never forgot. But they'd face it. Whatever came next, whoever was threatening them, they'd face it together. The way they should have from the beginning. The way they would for whatever time they had left. Two invisible people, finally visible to each other. Finally choosing to stand in the light, consequences be damned. And if that light drew danger, well, they'd learn to be dangerous too. If this story moved you in any way, if you felt their love, their pain, their desperate fight to be seen and to survive, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and tell me what part resonated most with you, what moment made you hold your breath or brought tears to your eyes. I read every single comment, and they truly mean everything to me. Also, let me know what city you're watching from. I absolutely love knowing where all you incredible people are located, what corners of the world this story has reached. Thank you for being here, for investing your time and heart into Amarachi and Dae-Hyun's journey. Until we meet again in the next story, stay blessed, stay safe, and remember that you are worthy of being chosen, exactly as you are.